All right. Happy Sabbath.
Happy Sabbath.
So good to be back. Enjoying the fellowship of the saints. All right. What a blessing we have in this. You know, there's so many out there who are, the Lord has scattered us like salt across the earth. Hopefully we're doing the job of salt. But how wonderful it is when we get to come together and encourage one another in the faith and have the fellowship of the saints. So we're back into 1 Samuel. And we're doing part 2. Because as I said last time up here, there is a lot in 1 Samuel. And I know we're doing here an overview. And you'll notice in this ride, this flyover of the Bible, there's times I'm kind of coming down with the plane a bit and going back up. So there's things that we're going to zoom in on a bit, things that we zoom back and try to get the overall picture. Sometimes it's the overall picture of the stories at hand. Sometimes we're trying to look back at like the whole Bible picture. You know, that's like where I began a lot of this, trying to like understand his story in all of this and what he's saying, because as I said from the beginning, it's easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees. You know, it's like having a puzzle, you know, and you can have little pieces of it together like a mosaic and see this picture here and this picture here and not realize how they all come together. So it's always good to get that 20,000 foot view, but at certain points we're going to come in a lot closer. And hence, this is a 2-part. As I said the first time, this is it's kind of funny I'm taking 1 Samuel into 2 parts, because 1 Samuel itself is a 2-parter, because this 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel are one book in the Hebrew. So we're breaking down even more here. As we noticed in the first one, this covers the period around 1100 to 1000 BC. This is basically the last judge through the first king. Samuel being the last judge, first king being Saul of Benjamin. We had saw that in the Tanakh, which is the acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Keshuvim, that Samuel is one of the books of the Nevi'im, one of the prophets. So we also looked at the key verses in the book of Samuel, namely here in the first part we did, 1 Samuel 8, 6 to 7. The thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people and all they say to you. They have not rejected you, they've rejected me, that I should not reign over them." So here's the theme. We see part of the problem during the period of the judges is they didn't have a king in Israel in those days to keep them together. Well, they did have a king, but not a king they acknowledged, not a king who was visible before them. We got to remember, we don't walk by sight, we walk by faith. And we have our eyes on the invisible. We need to be able to be like the prophets who can see the invisible God who reigns over us all, lest we lose sight of him and look to the nations like Israel did. 1 Samuel 13 to 14, Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God. He commanded you. God would have established your kingdom upon Israel forever." We would have heard about the house of Saul instead of all the focus on the house of David. You know, but now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought him a man after his own heart. And the Lord has commanded him to be captain over his people, because you have not kept that which the Lord commanded you. And then in chapter 15, verse 22 to 23, Samuel said, "Has the Lord a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. Rebellion is the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he's also rejected you from being king." And again, this is a great warning to us. You know, do we fool ourselves and we turn grace into license and say, "Hey, it's okay, I got a covering for that"? Hey, God would rather have you obey than lean on a sacrifice and say, hey, I got grace. This is covered. And live life in licentiousness. So we saw 1 Samuel is essentially 3 acts. In a sense, Act 1 is about Eli and Samuel. Act 2 is Samuel and Saul. And now we're coming into basically the rise of David. The stories here of Saul and the rise of David and the demise of Saul. Saul and David here in this chapter 16 through 31. One of the key verses is right here in the beginning. 1 Samuel 16:7. The Lord said to Samuel, look not on his countenance, nor on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. And this is a great warning to us in many ways. We got to be careful on who we think is the Lord's anointed, and like in this case, who we think is someone who is good in God's eyes, or how we judge anything or anybody. In the realm of seeking a mate, do you judge by the outward appearance and neglect the inner person of the heart and realizing what it is? It's wisdom here, seeking God in his knowledge of other people out there, because he knows the hearts, he knows the thoughts and intents of every one of us. All right, so we'll pick it up here in chapter 16 with the choosing of David and the rejection of Saul. Here we're going to come in and go through the text together. Other parts of this today we're just going to take in like an outline form, just get the brief story. So there's going to be some coming down and looking and rising back up and getting just like a view of what's happening here. So in 1 Samuel 16, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go, and I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. So Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he will kill me. So the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I'm come to sacrifice to the Lord, and call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. Then you will anoint unto me him who I will name to you. So Samuel did what the Lord said, and he came to Bethlehem, and the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, why are you here? Have you come here peaceably? And he said, peaceably, I'm come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves. Come with me into the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and called them to sacrifice. And it came to pass when they were come that he looked on Eliab. And he said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. So here Samuel is judging this man. Was Eliab a man like Saul? He was head and shoulders above Israel. Good looking. This has got to be the leader. He's taken Saul out. This must be one here, someone kind of like Saul in looks or something. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't look on his countenance, nor on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. The Lord doesn't see as a man sees. He looks upon the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. So note this here well, that here's a prophet of God. One who speaks, as it were, face to face with God, gives him visions, gives him directions, answers his questions, and gives him guidance and says, go do this and go this. And Samuel hears him. And even in that intimate relationship with God, he still makes the mistake and saying, surely this must be the one. So if a prophet of God can do that, don't deceive yourself in thinking that you can discern such things by your own thoughts as a person. Look for his guidance. So Jesse then called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, Lord hasn't chosen this one. And then Jesse had Shammah pass by, and he said, Lord hasn't chosen this. And again, Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. Samuel said to Jesse, are all your children here? Is this all of them? And he said, well, there remains the youngest one. He's out keeping the sheep. So Samuel said, go fetch him. We're not going to sit down till he's here. And so Jesse sent and brought David in, and he was ruddy, and he was withal of a beautiful countenance. He was goodly to look to, and the Lord said, arise, anoint him. This is him. He's the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. So at this point, the Spirit of the Lord is upon David. Samuel's anointed him because he said, I'm going to show you who to anoint as king. And so it's interesting in this, here he's anointed, yet he doesn't begin to reign. In fact, Saul still sits upon the throne. Though God's already pronounced, I have rejected you. I've taken the kingdom from you, and I've given it to a better man. And he's anointed that man now through Samuel. He still hasn't have him take control of the kingdom. What's the spiritual implications in that? Some things to chew on, right? What is the typology on that? So in here, we see the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. Now, this is something I did a series on spiritual warfare some years ago, and I think it's good that we recognize this because a lot of people are in confusion about spiritual warfare, especially because so much of that stuff comes from the charismatic community, that aspect. What we find in the scriptures is that someone who is filled with the Spirit of God can't be possessed by demons at the same time. You can't house both. In this case here, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and then he was troubled by an evil spirit, right? So when people are saying, oh yeah, I think there's some demonic activity with this person. Well, if there is, then that person needs to be sealed with the gift of the Holy Spirit because they don't have it. If someone's inhabited by an evil spirit, they're not inhabited by the Spirit of God at the same time. It doesn't happen. Right? So Saul's servant said to him, behold, now an evil spirit from God is troubling you. This is pretty bold. They're saying to the king, hey, you got demons. Right? That's pretty bold for his servants to say that. Hey, let our Lord now command your servants, which are before you, to seek out a man who is a cunning player on a harp, and it shall come to pass when the evil spirit from God is upon you, he shall play with his hand, and you'll be well. Now, this is intriguing. I don't know where they got this understanding from. Was it God revealed? Is it something that's happened in the past? What is it about someone playing on the harp's going to soothe the evil spirit? The scripture doesn't tell us exactly what's up. It's just, here it is. Here's what happened. Here's what they said. Here's what they did. Here's what David did. And hey, it works. So Saul said to his servants, provide me now a man that can play well and bring him to me. And in answer, one of the servants said, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, that is cunning and plain, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse, and said, send me David your son, who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, and a bottle of wine, and a kid, and sent them by David to his son to Saul. And David came to Saul, and stood before him, and he, Saul, loved him greatly, and became his armor bearer. Saul loved David here at the beginning of the relationship, and he made him his armor bearer. He's the one who would be with the shield before you in war, right? And bear his armor for him. Saul sent unto Jesse, and saying, let David, I pray you, stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight. It's interesting to see where Saul begins things and where he ends, because remember where he began with God when God first came to him. He's like, who am I? I'm so little. Why would you look at me? And then you see over time what was going on in Saul's heart. And so here he begins with this, hey, I appreciate, hey, David's helping me. This could be like a lot of relationships. A lot of marriages could be like this. Oh, I'm happy because they make me happy. They make me feel good. And then jealousies come up, and as we see in this case, jealousy definitely comes up, and these things shouldn't be. So it came to pass when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul that David took a harp and he played with his hand, and Saul was refreshed and he was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. So yeah, he appreciated David doing this for him. In the next couple of chapters, we read of David's triumphs and Saul's jealousy about these. We're going to come into here, of course, the story of David and Goliath, and then some of his other triumphs in war. So the Philistines in chapter 17, they gathered together their armies to battle, and they were gathered together at Hoeck, which belonged to Judah, and they pitched between Hoeck and Azekah in Ephes-Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they pitched by the valley of Elah and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And I highlight that to say, look, Saul's here on the scene. Saul's here in this battle. So this is going to kind of weigh into some of his things now as he's looking on this. Here he is. So Saul's one of the people getting challenged by Goliath. The Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them, and there went out a champion of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. He had a helmet of brass upon his head. He was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. He had greaves of brass upon his legs, a target of brass between his shoulders, and the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. One bearing a shield went before him. He stood and cried to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and you servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So Saul was looking at things through the eyes of a man and not seeking God and how to go about this. And he was just letting fear consume him. All right. So again, these are lessons for us. It's easy to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, here's what Saul did. I would, look at David. Oh yeah, that's great." What do you do? What do you do when you have giants in your life? Things that you say are insurmountable. Man, this great difficulty. Do we not believe that there's a God in Israel who can save us? There's not a God in earth who can save us and help us prevail against this giant. So David rose up. We're going to jump down to verse 20. David rose up early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took, because his father Jesse had sent him with some food to bring to his brothers. He had 3 of his brothers fighting in the war, and then he also said, "Bring this food stuff to the captain of the host of the 1,000." And so David came there, and as his father commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to fight, and he shouted for the battle. Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage and ran to the army. And he came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines. And he spake according to the same words. And David heard him. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him. They were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man that's come up? Surely to defy Israel he has come up. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel." So David spoke to the men that stood by him, saying, "What shall be done to the man that kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And the people answered him after this manner, saying, "So shall it be done to the man that kills him." And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke unto the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, "Why do you come down here? With whom did you leave the sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, the naughtiness of your heart. You've come down that you might see the battle." He said, what have I done? What cause do you have to have this? All right. Was his brother judging this matter correctly? Was there any evidence in David that, would he find anything in David prior to this that his brother would say, I know you. I know how bad your heart is. We see earlier, God said he's a man after my own heart. That yet his brother is judging him on these actions. Unrighteous judgment. So he turned him towards another. David turned to another, and he spoke after the same matter, saying, what's going on? What are you doing with this Philistine? And the people answered him again after this former matter, saying, hey, you killed this man. The king's going to take care of you. He'll give you a daughter for wife, and he'll set your father's house free, as it were. So when the words heard David, when they heard the words David spoke, they rehearsed them back to Saul. So now David tells them, hey, look, who is this guy? Who is he to fight a living God? So like, hey, there's this guy, David. Saul, he's not shaking at the knees like the rest of us. He says, who is this guy? God will take him. And so he tells Saul, and Saul sends for him. Verse 32, David says to Saul, don't let anyone's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you're not able to go to war with the Philistine to fight with him. You're but a youth. He's a man of war from his youth. And David said to Saul, your servant has kept his father's sheep. And there came a lion and a bear, and it took a lamb out of the flock. And I went after him, and I smote him, and I delivered out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and smote him and slew him. That's some pretty bold stuff, right? And the servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, seeing that he has defied the armies of the living God. David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. So again, notice David's humility. Hey, who do you think you are to take on this Philistine? Hey, look, I've had a situation. I keep my father's sheep. I had a lion come and take one. I went and I grabbed it by the beard and kill it. And then a bear came. I killed the bear. But he's saying, I'm telling you, the Lord saved me from that lion and from that bear. It's not saying it's by my own arm, by my own strength, but the same Lord who saved me from them will treat this Philistine the same way. So he was humble, but he was faithful. He was confident, not in himself, but in the Lord. Because you see that this Philistine, he says, this Philistine's mocking our God. He's mocking our God. He's challenging our God, saying, God is not with us, and who can kill me? So David's like, God will do it. He'll use me as an instrument to do it, like he did with the lion and the bear. All right. So Saul heard. Saul's like, hey, all right, you go. The Lord be with you. You know, he convinced Saul. Saul saw his confidence in the Lord. He saw his faith. He said, all right, you go. The Lord be with you. And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. He armed him with a coat of mail, and David girded his sword upon his armor, and he said, no, I can't go like this. He had him prove it. David was not a person who is used to fighting in armor. He's like, this is going to slow me down. I don't know it. I'm going to do what I know. And so David put him off, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on, verse 41, and drew near to David, and the man that bare the shield went before him, and the Philistine looked about and saw David, and he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy. So he's there because he's been challenging these Israelites 40 days. Send me a man, send me a man. You're going to send me this little guy? And that made him mad because he was puffed up. That's going to be, what are you, insulting me? You're going to send this youth to come fight against me? Now, it ain't like the cartoons, you know, where it's like some 7, 8-year-old, 10-year-old kid. David was said to be a man of war already. So don't mistake that. But Goliath of Gath he was insulted that David's the one who comes forth. Yeah, he's not even out there with armor or nothing. You know, this guy's not even a warrior. He's out here, he's a shepherd. You send a shepherd out to fight me. You know? Because he said he disdained him because he was a youth and ruddy and a fair countenance. He said, no, this guy's like a model. He said, not like some good-looking guy to fight me. Come on. He's not the warrior. So Philistine says to David, am I a dog that you come at me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come unto me, and I will give your flesh to the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you hast defied. So here, David knew the hard issue. He's challenging the armies of Israel. He says, you're defying God. You're defying Jehovah. I'm coming to you in his name. This day will the Lord deliver you into my hand, and I will smite you, and I will take your head from you. And I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day to the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saves not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So again, what's David's purpose in this? David's coming in because he has righteous anger. He hears the Philistine mocking God, and he is angered about it. And he's angered that his fellow people aren't doing nothing about it. Why are you guys here allowing this guy to mock God? And so he again says, the Lord's going to deliver you into my hand. And the reason this is going to happen is so all the earth may know that there's a God in Israel. This word's going to go out about what happened. Me, this shepherd, against you, you giant warrior, and the Lord's taking you out. And then he said, not only that, it's not only for the sake of all the other nations to know that there's a God in Israel, but it's for this assembly to hear that the Lord doesn't save with sword and spear. It isn't because you're a vast army of Israel. Same lesson they'll talk like with Gideon or any other points in history, that it's God who saves. So he's trying to tell them, don't put your trust in man or the princes of man. Don't put your trust in Egypt. Don't put your trust in all these other armies or your sword. Says put your trust in God, and God will deliver. And so this is his purpose in standing here to defy the Goliath of Gath, because Goliath of Gath defies God. And David says, you ain't right. And God's going to take you down. And so in verse 54, 58, David took the head of the Philistine. So he, as we know, he put the stones into his head, and then he cut off his head, and he took the head of the Philistine, and he brought it to Jerusalem, and he put his armor, Goliath's armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the captain of hosts, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, inquire whose son is this stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David answered, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now, this is one of those areas of scripture, like when I first read it, kind of like struck me like odd. You know, it's like, wait a second, because we just read how Saul loved David. David was there. He was playing the harp for him. He was doing these things. Why is he saying, who is this? Well, I believe that this section here is dealing with part of the promise to whoever killed the Philistine, that their father's house would be set free. And so he's saying, okay, who's your father? It's Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Because we're going to see the other promise was that he would get a king's daughter. We're going to see that come into play as well. All right. So, Sagan into 18, it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking to Saul, that, yeah, like,
so Saul knew who David was,
Saul knew who David was, but he probably didn't remember what his father's house was. And so who is this that I need to fulfill this contract with? Because he killed the Philistine. Yeah, whose house do I got to, basically, as I understand it, would make him basically non-taxable, like Jesse became a 501c3, It came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Jonathan is Saul's son, right? And so they became besties. Yeah, they're BFF. Now, if you remember when Ken and I did a series on He Wrote of Me, and I was going to the types of Christ, and I went and think with David that his bestie was Jonathan. And you come into the Gospels and you see the one who the Lord loves was John over and over. So the typology's in there. So Saul took him that day and would not let him go anymore home to his father's house. So basically he took David in as a son. You come stay here with me. Jonathan would be like his brother. So Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped him of the robe that was upon him and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle. And David went out wheresoever Saul sent him, and he behaved himself wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So here, the relationship with Saul is still at a good point. He's brought him into his house. His son becomes dearest of friends with him. All of his servants accept David. David is a faithful servant to Saul. Wherever Saul says, go, David goes. Go fight these people. Go do this. I set you over the people of war. And David does it. But it comes to pass, as they came, David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out from all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets and joy and with instruments of music, and the women answered one another as they played. So they were like, a woman would sing something, the others would answer back with the words. And so like kind of singing like a callback. And so they were singing, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was wroth. He was mad. That saying displeased him. They said, they've ascribed to David 10,000s. To me, they've ascribed but thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day forward. He's saying, wait a second. These people are saying David's greater than I. They're going to make him king. So he starts, here's where jealousy and suspicions and all this start coming in. But it came to pass on the next day that an evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand, and Saul cast a javelin, and he set out to smite David into the wall with it, and David avoided it out of his presence twice. So he's there, there's evil spirits upon him, David's trying to soothe him, and Saul throws a javelin at him twice to try to pin him to the wall with the javelin. He tries to kill David here. So this spirit of jealousy was hardcore upon Saul, and he grew in a bitterness and had a deep conspiratorial view towards David and what's happening. But David remained faithful. Verse 17 in chapter 18, 17 through 30, Saul said to David, behold, my older daughter Merab, her will I give you to wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. Okay, I'm going to give you the wife. I'll give you my daughter, as was contracted, but continue to be a captain of my host and fight the battles where I tell you. For Saul said, let not my hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him. So say, hey, I'm going to give you my daughter the wife, but you need to go wherever I send you the war. And so his thought was, I'm going to send you the war and have the Philistines kill you. It's interesting looking at this being played upon David, because what does David come to do in his day? Right? So David says to Saul, who am I? What is my life or my father's family in Israel that I should be the son-in-law to the king? I don't deserve your daughter. Who am I? So David had humility, like where Saul began. He says, who am I? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel, the Meholaite, to wife. So pulling away, hey, you can, no, I'm giving her to him. Trying to get at David. But Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And they told her dad, hey, Michal likes David. Well, this made Saul happy. Because Saul said, I'm going to give her that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, you shall this day be my son-in-law in the one of the two. And Saul commanded his servants, saying, commune with David secretly, and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. So he's having his people, hey, David is high. Tell him I love him a lot. Tell him he's so much loved here in my house. Get him to marry my daughter. So David said, does it seem a light thing to you to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I'm a poor man and I'm lightly esteemed? And the servant of Saul told him this, hey, on this matter spoke David. And Saul said, you tell David, the king desires, I don't desire any dowry, except for 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hands of the Philistines. Here's exactly what I'm saying we see later with Uriah the Hittite, when David sends him out and puts him on the front line to die. So he says, you go off and get me 100 foreskins of the Philistines, David. She'll be your wife. And he's thinking, I just Uriah'd him on the front line. Uriah didn't happen yet, but he's like, I'm putting him on the front line. David's surely going to die. I'll use the prospect of my daughter being his wife as the carrot to lead him to his death. All right. And when the servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. And wherefore David arose and went, and he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave Michal, his daughter, to wife. And Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was yet the more afraid of David, and Saul became David's enemy continually. So he's now jealous of David's. First, he's jealous of everyone singing about David. Now he's seeing that the Lord's with David. And remember, the Lord's cut Saul off. He's rejected him. Said, I rejected you. Samuel said, this is going to be yours, David. Or this is going to be yours, Saul, and you were wicked. You didn't obey his command, and now it's taken from you, and it's given to a greater man than you. So now he's thinking, is this the greater man? The Lord's with him. Look what he's done here. He should have been dead, and he brings me 200 foreskins. Gave him double what he even asked for. Yeah. And the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself even more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. It's good to take this look through David in his life, because I think a lot of times when people think about David, and two things generally come to people's mind. Oh, that he was a man after God's own heart. Oh, and he sinned with Bathsheba. And they don't understand how the two jive. But we see, look at David here, how he is through this all. His faithfulness and his trust in God, his continued humility, and his continued submission to the Lord's anointed, even knowing that Lord's anointed was rejected by God, though he still sits on the throne. Saul tried to kill him several times now. There's going to be more as we read. But David never raises his hand against him. How are we with that? You know that everyone who is in Messiah is the Lord's anointed in that instant. We all have been anointed with the Spirit of God. Do we raise our hands against the Lord's anointed? Do we speak or do evil, curse, be embittered against? Because look at all the stuff that David endures, and his heart remains righteous towards Saul. So at this point, we get the man on the run. Yep, I figured that would elicit that response. So Saul is, we see, continually evil towards David at this point. And so David goes to take off, as it were. So we see in chapter 19 here, Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, saying, my father is seeking to kill you. Now I therefore pray you, take heed to yourself until the morning, and abide in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand before my father in the field where you art, and I will commune with my father of you, and what I see that I will tell you. So Jonathan spoke good of David to Saul. So Jonathan stood in the gap, and he reminded Saul. He said, don't let the king sin against his servant, against David. He has not sinned against you, because his works have been towards you very good. He put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it. You rejoiced. Then will you go and sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be slain. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all these things, and Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. You know, this happens a lot in relationships. People get mad, they seem to get things smoothed over, but they're not necessarily there in Saul's heart. There's at times when he seems to have, like, you know, people put tape on the dash to cover up the idiot lights. They're not really fixing the problem. And this might be, I mean, Jonathan's speaking the truth, but I think Saul received this like tape. Hey, all right, I'll hear you for one moment. But again, because his heart was not made right, his heart continued to harbor jealousy and bitterness for David. Yeah, yep. Bury the hatchet right in his back. So there was again war. David went out. He fought with the Philistines. He slew them with great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in the house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with a javelin, but he slipped out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin to the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So he's mad again because David went out to war with the Philistines and has success. Again, he's hearing that song in his head. Saul killed his thousands, David killed his 10,000s, and he's like, oh. You know, people do that though. People start repeating stuff in their heads, and it embitters them against other people. What refrain is echoing through your head about other people? What are you doing about it? All right. So Saul sent messengers unto David's house to watch him, to slay him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, meaning Saul's daughter, told him. She said, if you want to, if not to save your life tonight, tomorrow you're going to be slain. You're going to need to get out of here because my dad's going to kill you. And so Michal led David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. she made up a dummy and put it in the bed with goat's hair to, like, for a wig to be like David's head, to try to trick. Yeah, it did a Ferris Bueller, and to trick the people. So when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he's sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David and say, bring him to me out of bed that I can kill him. And the messengers come in. There's the dummy with the pillow of goat's hair. And Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me and sent away my enemy that he's escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said unto me, let me go. Why should I kill you? So David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel to Ramah, and he told him all that Saul had done. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Nahioth. So Samuel here, the prophet, is continuing to hear about the wickedness, the fall of Saul, and what's going on in his heart. And so Saul sent messengers to take David in chapter 19, 20 to 24. And they saw the company of the prophets prophesying there. They were with Samuel, because remember, David just came to Samuel. And Samuel was standing as appointed over them, and the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. And when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied also. And he went unto Ramah and came to a great well that is in Seku, and he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they had Nahioth in Ramah. And he went there to Nahioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him. And he went and prophesied. And he prophesied there in Nahioth in Ramah. He stripped off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, is Saul among the prophets? So that's another one, like my first reading, and I'm like, what is this talking about? What happened here? And essentially, this is kind of like it somewhat reminds me of the events of like Balaam and Balak, how Balaam kept wanting to come after Israel, but he couldn't. And so Saul's sending these people after David. He sends messengers, you go kill David. And they come there, and God turns them into prophets to pray. And so they're taking off their course of coming to kill David, and they turn to people who are praising God. And then he sends more, and they're turned from their course of killing David to prophesying and praising God. Then he sends more, and they're turned off their course from killing David and prophesy. And then he comes there himself, and it happens to him. It's like God is thoroughly showing Saul, this is my man. You're not touching him. No matter what's in your heart, I'm going to turn you in your intent to destroy him. I'm going to turn you from it. So zooming up a little bit here, because like I said, there's a lot of text in here. We can be breaking this down in even more parts. So chapter 20, we find that David consults with Jonathan for his safety. In like verses 1 to 10, 11 to 17, Jonathan and David renew their covenant by oath. They make a swearing, hey, because Jonathan knows his son or his dad wants to kill him still. So he's saying, hey, I'm with you, David. I'm protecting you. Chapter 20, verses 18 to 23 is when they're discussing, hey, here it is. It's the new moon tomorrow. You're going to be expected at dinner with my dad. I'm going to tell him you have a sacrifice for your family in Bethlehem. And so that comes to place. And he says, hey, after these things, I'm going to tell you, he comes up with the ruse of the arrow. He says, I'm going to bring this, get out there. I'm going to shoot this arrow. If I shoot it that way, if I shoot it past the lad, if I shoot it before the lad, that's going to be the sign of what's going to happen with my dad, where he's at. I'm going to show you how he behaves when you're not there for the new moon. And so we find in that couple of verses, 24 to 34, that Saul sees David's not there, and he's mad. And he gets mad to the point now he's mad at his son. He says, why are you conspiring against me for David? And now he throws the javelin at Jonathan. And so Jonathan goes off and he does the whole thing with the arrow, and then meets with David and says, hey, look, I love you. Take care. Go off and do this. My dad wants to get you. So that's basically the gist of chapter 20. In 21, David then leaves Jonathan's presence and comes to Nob, and that's where he meets with Ahimelech, the priest, and he obtains the hallowed bread, because remember, he's there and he's like, hey, do you have anything I can eat? What's that bread under your arm? And he goes, hey, this is the showbread. This is holy. It's only for the priests. And David says, well, didn't you change that out? Isn't there new showbread that's there at tabernacle? So isn't that in a way ordinary bread? And can't I have it? And the priest says, well, if you kept yourself from women, he says, well, these past 3 days I've been out and I haven't done it. And let me, feed me the people. And so Ahimelech says, all right. And he's there. But in the midst of David meeting with Ahimelech and the priest there is someone in there who is present, who is Doeg the Edomite. And he's there and he's beholding all this happen there at Nob. And Doeg the Edomite is a servant of Saul. He's aligned with Saul, and he sees that Ahimelech is helping David and his men. So David asked of Ahimelech about having a weaponry, and he's like, well, what's here is Goliath's sword and his stuff. So David's like, all right, I'll take that. And so he took it. And then from here, he comes to Gath, which is kind of funny. He goes there, he takes Goliath's sword, and he goes to Goliath's hometown for refuge. He comes to Gath for refuge, and he pretends to be crazy. So here's the text for this. David arose. This is 1 Samuel 21, 10-15. David arose and fled that day for the fear of Saul, and he went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, hey, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't it interesting? They're recognizing David as the king. All right. And did they not sing one to another of him in their dances, saying Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s? So the Philistines even know the songs. You see why Saul's a little upset, it like hit number 1 on the Billboard charts around the nations, and he feels mocked. And so David laid these words up in his heart, and he was so afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. He's saying, okay, I'm come here for refuge against Saul. Now Achish knows of what the Lord did for me in my fighting, and I've killed 10,000. Surely Achish is going to kill me, because he's threatened by me, just like Saul threatened by me. And so David decided to act like a nutcase. And he changed his behavior before them. He feigned himself mad in their hands, and he scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and he let spittle fall down his beard. And then said Achish to his servants, hey, that man's crazy. Why you ever brought him to me? What do I have need of a madman? You've brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Didn't this guy come to my house? So David, bought himself some safety there by pretending to be crazy, so Achish wouldn't be afraid of him. Achish didn't see him as some valiant warrior that he's heard about. He just saw him as some weird nut guy with spit all over himself. Chapter 22, David therefore departed the presence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brother and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, they gathered themselves to him, and he became a captain of them. So people who were not happy with the kingship of Saul and how King Saul was treating them, who joined themselves under David, they all came down to David at Adullam, and there was with them there. He became captain of them. There was about 400 men. And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, let my father and my mother, I pray you, come forth and be with you till I know what God will do for me. So he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. And the prophet Gad said to David, don't abide in the hold, depart and get you into the land of Judah. So David departed and came to the forest of Haaretz. So it's interesting how David was, we'll see, he was making use of various Gentile nations around him for his safety against Saul. And he was making league with them in various things. And in this case, he had the Moabites taking care, housing his parents to protect his parents. And we'll see his continued dealings with Achish, the king of Gath, that he makes league with him. So when Saul heard that David was discovered and the men that were with him, Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having a spear in his hand. All his servants were standing about him. Saul said to his servants that stood about him, "Hear you now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you conspired against me, and there's none that shows me that my son has made league with the son of Jesse? There's none of you that's sorry for me or shows unto me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as it is this day?" So now he's like, totally woe is me, and thinking, you guys are all against me. David's out there, he's gathering men to themselves. Is he going to offer, does he have enough to give you guys stuff too, so you go against me too? Apparently you're against me because none of you told me what's going on. None of you are providing evidence or helping me get David. You know, my own son Jonathan has made a league against me. He's made a league with David. You're all like him. So this is where Doeg says, hey man, I got your info. Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, said, I saw the son of Jesse come into Nob to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and he, meaning Ahimelech, inquired of the Lord for David, and gave David victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, and the priests that were in Nob, and they all came to the king, to Saul. And Saul said, Hear now, you son of Ahitub. He answered, Here I am, my lord. Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword, and you've inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me, to lie in wait as it is this day? So so here's what he's attributing things to David. He thinks David's hunting him. David's lying in wait for me. David's going to try to get me. And you conspired against me for this to happen. Ahimelech answered the king and said, Who is so faithful among all your servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law? And he does your bidding. He's honorable in your house. So he's making a plea like Jonathan. Right? It's like, what are you doing? Who else has been so faithful to you? Who else has been so honorable? Who else does everything you say to do? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Be it far from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. He says, I didn't do this just for David's sake. I see David as your servant. He's been faithful, the most faithful in all your house. And so by serving what I did with him, I'm serving you. Why are you laying a charge at my feet? And king said to him, You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. And the king said to the footmen that stood about him, You turn and slay the priest of the Lord, because their hand is also with David, and because they knew when he fled, and they didn't show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall on the priest of the Lord. These men here had a proper fear of God not to kill his priest, even though the king commanded it. So the king said to Doeg, You turn and fall upon the priest. So Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priest, and he slew on that day 75 persons that did wear the linen ephod. In Nob, the city of the priest, smote he with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and sucklings, oxen and asses and sheep, and the edge of the sword, with the edge of the sword. And one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped. And he fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priest. And David said to Abiathar, I knew it that day. Doeg the Edomite was there, and I knew he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Abide with me, fear not, for he that seeks my life seeks your life. But with me you shall be in safeguard. David's like, man, I should have known better. I knew Doeg was there. I know he's tight with Saul. I've cost you your family's life. But stay with me because Saul wants to kill me just like he wants to kill you, but you'll be protected with me. So stay with me. So then David in chapter 23, he inquires of the Lord through Abiathar, and he rescues the city of Keilah. And God shows him, showing him the coming of Saul there and the treachery of the Keilites, he escapes from Keilah. And then in Ziph, Jonathan comes and comforts him, as Jonathan often does with David. And the Ziphites tell Saul that David is amongst them. So, hey, here he is. Come get him. And at Maon, David is rescued from Saul by the invasion of the Philistines. And then David comes to dwell at En-Gedi. And that brings us to chapter 24, where David is in the cave at En-Gedi, and this is an occasion where he spares Saul's life. This is when he's there. Saul's covering his feet. He's stooping to poop, and David comes up and cuts off part of his clothing there, and then basically on 1 through 15 there, he shows Saul, hey, look, I could have killed you. Your life was there. I didn't take it. I'm not trying to kill you, Saul. You're trying to kill me. So the next few verses there, 16 to 23, Saul acknowledges his fault and takes an oath of David and departs and says, hey, you've been righteous. You're right. So again, this shows David's heart that and David's respect for the office of the king, that is the Lord's anointed, and he won't lay his hand on him, even though this king's over and over and over trying to kill him, chasing him all around Israel, even out of Israel and to other places. And David is remaining faithful to God and who God has placed above him. Right? So chapter 25 begins with the death of Samuel. Verse 1 there's the death of Samuel. 2 to 9, we got David in Paran, and he sends to Nabal. Nabal, his churlishness provokes David to destroy him. Nabal is his Nabal's wife Abigail says, hey, look, isn't he called Nabal? Nabal is the Hebrew word for fool. He said, of course he's going to answer you foolishly. He's Nabal. And pacifies David in this, but we see the death of Nabal. And then towards the end of the chapter here, David takes Abigail and Ahinoam to be his wives. And then Saul takes Michal, David's wife, and gives her to another man, giving her to Phalti. So this is, in essence, two of his daughters he's pulled from David. First one he offered, yes, she's going to be yours. He never gets her, but gives her to another man. In this case, he gave Michal to David and then pulls Michal and gives her to another man, Phalti. But David here begins his marriage with Abigail and Ahinoam. Chapter 26, we find Saul comes to Hachilah against David. David keeps Abishai from killing Saul, but takes his spear and his cruse. This is much like the situation at En-Gedi. There in the trench, David has opportunity. Abishai's there. He wants to kill Saul. David's like, no, he is the Lord's anointed. Do not lay a hand on him. And as Saul was laying there sleeping, he had a spear there in the ground, and he has a cruse of oil or water there, and David takes him and brings him over on across a distance, and then says, hey, Saul, I could have killed you. I could have killed you. So that's in the point where David reproves, and he reproves Abner, because he says, hey, Abner, aren't you supposed to be protecting the king? Look what I got here. You want to put anyone to death, put Abner to death, Saul, because he failed you. I could have killed you. Why don't you kill Abner? You know, and then Saul acknowledges his sin. There, chapter 27, David's duplicity, because he plays with words here, and it gets him cover. So David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek and not seek me anymore in the coast of Israel. I will escape out of his hand. All right. So he says, one of these days, Saul's going to get me. He's like nonstop after me. Anywhere I go in Israel, he's after me. I better go to the land of Philistines. Essentially, Saul ain't going to come there. Saul doesn't have the courage to come there. And so I'll get out. And so David arose and he passed over with 600 men and that were with him in Achish, or unto Achish, who is the son of Maach. He is the king of Gath. Remember, Gath is the land where, Goliath was from there. And so he comes back to Achish. He was the one that David pretended to be crazy to. And he comes to Achish, and David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man in his household. And David with his two wives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the Carmelitess, who was Nabal's wife. And it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, and he didn't seek any more for him. He's like, fine. He went to the Philistines. And David said to Achish, if I've now found grace in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I might dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in a royal city with you? So again, David's humility. Let me have some land on the outskirts. I'm just a shepherd anyway. Why should I be living in your royal city? I'm nobody. And so Achish gave him Ziklag. Wherefore Ziklag pertains to the kings of Judah to this day. And the time David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was a full year and 4 months. David and his men went up and he invaded the Geshurites and the Gezrites and the Amalekites, for those nations were of old and the inhabitants of the land, as you go to Shur, even to the land of Egypt. And David smote the land and left neither man nor woman alive, took away the sheep, the oxen, the asses, the camels, the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. And Achish said, where have you made a road today? So it seems like it was kind of David's thing. Hey, so who'd you go off and kill today, David? Who'd you conquer today? And David said, against the south of Judah and against the south of the Jerahmeelites and against the south of the Kenites. And David saved neither man nor woman alive to bring good tidings to Gath, saying, lest that should tell on us, saying, so did David, and so will this manner of all the while he lived in the country of the Philistines. And Achish believed David, saying, he has made his people, Israel, utterly to abhor him. Therefore, he shall be my servant forever. So David was duplicitous here in that he just spoke in generalities. Yeah, I came to the south of Judah. I wiped out people there. I did this. I did that. And he said he didn't take any captives because people would come back and say, he killed my people. They're not Israelites. He killed these because, yes, he came into those regions, but he was killing enemies of Israel. Achish is thinking he came in and fought against Israel. And so he's like, hey, Israel's never going to want David back. He's mine forever. Israel's going to hate him. No, you weren't understanding what David was saying. All right. So, chapter 27, Saul, hearing David to be in Gath, doesn't seek for him anymore. David begs Ziklag of Achish, the king of Gath, as we just read there, and David persuades Achish. He fought against Judah, but that wasn't the reality. He fought against people around Judah. Okay. Chapter 28 is Saul's desperation. Why we say that? Because he was so desperate that he came to the witch at Endor. Because he wanted to know and understand and see what's happening. He wanted to, because he, like all of us, without a prophet, without God to give us a vision of what's happening, he was cut off from that. And he was so desperate, he went to a witch at Endor. He went to a psychic, a medium. Tell me my fortune. And so we're all familiar with that witch at Endor. If you're not, go ahead and read chapter 28. I'm not going to go in depth into that today. Yeah. So for those who are unfamiliar with the story, this short little synopsis: he went to see the witch at Endor. He didn't. He's got himself from being Saul because Saul had all the witches say they got to be put to death, as the law says any which way, and says that Samuel rose up and condemned Saul, and the witch and Saul are both freaked out. Like, oh. So, chapter 29, David defeats the Amalekites. The Philistines had gathered together all their armies to Hoeck, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands. That David and his men passed on a reward with Achish, and said, the princes of the Philistines, why are these Hebrews here? So David's been in a league with Achish of Gath, and the Gathites are fellow Philistines, right? Because remember, Goliath was a Philistine. He was of Gath. So he's there. He's been fighting. He's been doing stuff with Achish, fighting for him. And so Achish brings him to battle, and the rest of the Philistine nations are like, why you got these Hebrews here fighting with us? Because remember, it was not just David, it's David and his men. And so they're upset. Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, isn't this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which has been with me these days or these years? I found no fault with him, since he fell unto me unto this day. And the princes of the Philistines were mad at him. And the princes of the Philistines said to him, you make this fellow return, that he can go again to his place which you've appointed him. Don't let him come down to battle with us, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us, where he will reconcile himself again to his master. And should not be with the heads of these men? Is this not David, whom they sang one to another in dances? Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And Achish called David and said to him, surely as Jehovah lives, you have been upright, and your going out and coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. I have not found evil in you since the day of your coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lords don't like you. Wherefore go return, go in peace, that you don't displease the lords of the Philistines. And David said to Achish, what have I done? And what have you found in your servant so long as I've been with you to this day, that I may not go fight against your enemies of my Lord and my king? Talking about Achish. And Achish answered and said to David, I know you are good in my sight, as an angel of God. Notwithstanding, the prince of the Philistines have said, he will not go with us to battle. Wherefore rise up now early in the morning with your master's servant that are come with you. And as soon as you be up early in the morning, have light depart. So David and his men rose up early in the morning to depart, to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. So I wanted to zoom in on this here today to show, again, David's humility and David's faithfulness, even to an enemy nation at the time, that he was faithful to Achish, and Achish's testimony of him and of God. Talks about how Jehovah is with him, and he acknowledges the God of Israel, the God of us all. And this the testimony here of David. It's wonderful. Chapter 30. So the Amalekites spoiled Ziklag. Remember Ziklag? Remember what Ziklag is? That's David's new home. That was the land given to him by Achish for him and his men. So the Amalekites come in and spoil Ziklag. David asking counsel is encouraged by God to pursue them. He said, what should I do? Should I take these people out? And God says, yeah, go get them. And by the means of a revived Egyptian, he's brought to the enemies and recovers all the spoil. Now, in this case, this is the case of the Egyptian who I fell sick 3 days and 3 nights ago, and now this is the day, and here's what happened with these people. And so that whole story's in there. Then David does a law to divide the spoil equally among them that fight and them that keep the stuff, and he sends presents to his friends. And this brings us to the final chapter, the deaths of Saul and his sons. And we'll zoom in on this. And before we close out, we'll just read in here this last chapter. The Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. The Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, who were Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. So he's there, the archers are fighting against him. His three sons are there killed in battle. And then arrows come at him, and they hit him, and he's basically laying there dying from being shot with arrows. And Saul says to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me." He didn't want to be captured by the Philistines and have them drag him around, do whatever to him. So he says, kill me, so they can't take me. But his armor bearer would not. He was so afraid. I'm not going to be the one killing the king. that's the Lord's anointed, you know. And so Saul took a sword and fell upon him himself. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell upon his sword and died with him. He probably didn't want the occasion of saying, well, you were involved in this, or you didn't protect him, or well, what's going to happen to me? He was afraid. And so he killed himself. And so Saul died, and his three sons and his armor bearer and all his men that same day together. And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they were there on the other side of the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities, and they fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. So Israel lost their kings, their princes, and they lost some cities. They lost ground, and the Philistines came in and took them back. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his three sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head. They stripped off his armor, and they sent it to the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall at Bet-shan. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night, and they took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bet-shan, and they came to Jabesh, and they burnt them there. They took their bones and they buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So the Philistines kind of did like what happened with their great Goliath, who had his head cut off and put on display and his armor put there. They did this now to Saul. Or we're getting Saul back. But this is the story of 1 Samuel. Like I said, this is half the story of Samuel, because 2 Samuel is going to be picked up where this is left off. We see in here, especially here, there's so many great stories in here. I said like, it's so hard to get through this, and it's like, all right, what do I zoom in on? What do I pull back from? Because there's just so much meat in here, and it's like, I'm one who doesn't like to bypass stuff. I definitely like to dot the I's and cross the T's on every little issue. But there is so much meat in here and so much warning. If we'll take and have an eye to see it and apply this to our own lives, you know, from the great hope and faithfulness early with the prayer of Hannah and her faithfulness to God, and then her giving up of her son and the faithfulness of that son, Samuel, unto God throughout all of his days, even as the people rejected his family, his sons, as it were, because they really rejecting God. And to see Saul from his small beginnings, his small humble beginnings, to finally seeing, it's the same thing for all of us, because we're all going to be tested within our heart, and that those tests are going to prove it. And as Saul had these tests, what we originally saw of him, you know, you look at him, he's basically like a gentle giant, as it were. He's head and shoulders above Israel, and he, in his own mind, he, didn't puff himself up, but somewhere in there was leaven in that heart that puffed him up. And it gets exposed more and more through the various trials in his life. And then we see it full force with his whole relationship with David. Someone that he saw was good for him, who was good for all Israel, first of all, killing the Philistine, and then takes him into his house as his own son, makes his son Bessie, takes him as a son-in-law, all these things, but then the jealousy and the fear that drove Saul. Those same things can grab a hold of you and destroy you like Saul. It doesn't take demon possession for that to happen. These things were in Saul's heart, and they destroyed him and his household. Again, contrast that with David, and David's reactions to all of Saul's actions or everything through life, and how he was faithful and trusting of God in every situation. He trusted God with the lion. He trusted God with the bear. He trusted God with Goliath. He trusted God with Saul time and time and time and time again. Trusted him in battle against the Philistines. Trusted him in battle against anybody. And he was able to walk and walk even with Israel's enemies in such a way. These are why we see David as a man for God's own heart. His heart was right before God. All right. May we learn and do likewise. That's it for today. Again, I'll be up next time with the next half of the story, 2 Samuel.